thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to see everybody. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Give that a second to kick in. Okay, right. So hopefully you can see my slides. If not, please let me know. I won't necessarily be able to see the chat as we go through. But I've put a link there to the Padlet. If you've not used Padlet before, it's a brilliant little tool for just allowing people to share their thoughts as we go. I can see that on another screen, so you can pop anything there. And of course, if it goes in the chat, I'm sure we'll catch up on it fairly regularly. So this is the second of 2 TeachMeets that we've done. The first one was all about stopping firefighting. And I'm going to try and have an overlap with that first session because I know not everybody was there, and then move fairly seamlessly into the second one, which is really about trying to set up the systems that work. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time over the past few weeks and generally talking to people, teachers, TAs, head teachers, about what's going on in their schools, and I'm going to try and respond to some of that today. So they're probably not here. They've fed in on your behalf, and I'm really interested to hear what you see, hear what you want to say as well. So let's see if this works. Great. The first thing I'd love to do is take a moment to invite you, to ask you to sign up to join the work we're doing. So I set up a small mailing list at a talk like this at the beginning of the year. We're already up to over 400 people joined. If you scan that one with your phone on the screen, it'll take you to a very short sign up form, and that means you'll get all the resources that my team and I produce, and I'm going to tell you about some of those in a second. Before I do, let me just guarantee you that you're not going to get spammed with tons of emails. How can I be confident that you won't get spammed? Well, it's really down to my own disorganization. So this has been running for a few months. I'm yet to send a single email to this group, but we're going to be starting that off in the new year after Christmas, and I hope you're going to find it really useful. So what will you be getting through this link? Well, we're trying to set up a bit of a community around EAL specialist teachers and those who are interested in EAL in other roles. We've done a number of research projects recently looking at all kinds of things, from what head teachers need, because that's a really under-recognized gap in our knowledge. The needs of head teachers to be able to lead schools where good EAL provision happens. It's just this massive gap. And you need school leaders who can manage you effectively, who understand your work, who can hold you accountable. Because one of the big problems we know in EAL is that people end up so isolated, and if your leadership team doesn't understand the value of what you're doing, then how can you make the progress you want to? We've also done work looking at what cities and regions can do to offer a more coherent and integrated approach to young people when they arrive in the city and their families. We've done work looking at specialist knowledge of teachers and so on. So for each of these, we write up a short research report between 2 and 4 sides so people can read it, and we'll share all of those through that list. We're also launching on something really exciting, and this is brand new. Actually, we got this confirmed last week. So we're going to be spending the rest of this academic year expanding our team here at the University of Bristol and focusing explicitly on exactly the problems that teachers are facing, not so that we can research them, but so that we can do something about them. So I urgently want to hear and want an opportunity to spend more time, maybe a Zoom call, maybe one of our team could visit, to look at exactly where the challenges are for you, how they compare with the challenges other people have. And our goal is to create a series of tools and resources that will precisely target those needs. So tell us what you need to do your job better, and we will do everything we can to create those things. And to do that, we're going to be working in an entirely new way. We're going to be working with partners across the sector. We're going to be working with commercial partners who can help us create things that will scale. We're going to be working with academic partners and universities to make sure it retains that absolute solid robustness that you'd expect. So that's the end of my plug. I will show this QR code again at the end. Anyone you want to can sign up. It's absolutely free and it always will be. But it's our way of trying to find out what can we do to better meet the needs of a frankly sometimes battered community of specialists. Okay, so what are we going to do today? Well, there's the link at the bottom for the Padlet. We're going to look at language development, but before that, we're going to go back a step and look at what are the context and demographics of EAL. We're going to look at how you can set expectations for teachers and colleagues. And finally, we're going to look at some links and resources. And across that time, what I'm hoping we'll do is have a reasonable good sense of what's happening in the background. That's a very short section, but it's important, I think. We're going to look at how children and young people develop language over time, and then what schools can be doing about it. So we said today's session was about moving from arrival to thrival, and I think there's really three big things we need to do in that process. So we need to make sure the school is well set up for them, and a lot of that really is about a wide understanding of what makes children succeed as language learners and what it means for their curriculum learning. That's why we've got that section in there. We need to make sure people have the skills to support bilingual children when they arrive, and it's not all the EAL coordinator's job. Now, I'm going to use that term EAL coordinator really generally, and by that I just mean whether or not you've got that role, EAL specialist, EAL coordinator, I mean you, right? The person who does EAL. That might be something that you've been working on, leading, running for a long time. You may have greatness thrust upon you and not know where to start. So we're going to talk through a bit of that, and I've got some links and resources at the end. What's really important though is that you don't let me just talk and talk and talk, because I love this subject and I will talk about it until midnight, pause for breath and carry on until morning. We've got the Padlet up there if you want space to write at a bit more length, and I'll be inviting you to all the way through. But we've also got, of course, the chat box for more immediate comments. And I'm going to try and shape it as we go to things people say. The Padlet you can write in anonymously. Obviously, your name will be there in the chat if you use that. Say what you want to say. Ask what you want to ask. For me, for each other, because then we can shape it to your needs, experience, interest as we go. Okay, so I'm going to say a few words about the demographics and the wider context. You'll notice two things. It's 7 o'clock and I've been teaching all day, and so you'll see me recapitulating as we talk, and you'll also see lots of pictures of mountains. And someone asked me once, why are there so many pictures of mountains? Do I feel that EAL is a mountain we have to climb? And the truth is, no, I just think they're pretty, and I love pictures of mountains. So any talk I give, you get lots of pictures of mountains. They make me happy. There's nothing more significant to it than that. Okay, so you would have seen a couple of slides here very frequently, because I think they're really important. This is 2023, where migration has been top of the political agenda. The Star Chamber, they're called, of the European Research Group, have been on the news twice today, just in time for the 1 o'clock news bulletin, and apparently they've been meeting again since 6 o'clock to decide whether the Prime Minister's plan for this Rwanda business can be taken forward or not. EAL is so tied up with the migration debate at the moment that it's very, very difficult to get anyone in central government, anyone Ofsted or the DFE or anyone at a national level to really focus on it. What I want to start by saying is that it wasn't always so. So this is the strategy and the priorities document from 2008-2009, developed by the Teacher Development Agency, as was then. They recognize that this is a multilingual country with a largely monolingual teaching workforce. By and large, I imagine the people on this call are perhaps more multilingual than the average. And they set out to plan what we could do. So point number one, 4 priorities: equip the non-specialist workforce to help EAL learners achieve their full potential. 2, identify those specialist roles. 3, how can we use EAL specialists the best? How can we monitor that provision is effective? this to me is manna from heaven. It went in 2010 with the bonfire of the Quangos and Michael Gove, famously. And it hasn't come back. And since then, it's been tied up with this immigration debate. There's nothing new under the sun. And some of us have been kicking around a long time, some people much longer than me. Some are fairly new to it. But I just want to always start by reminding ourselves that we did have an enormously positive approach to EAL. It was increasingly at the forefront of the political agenda and of what happens in schools. And it's not at the moment, but that's just at the moment. And if we take a longer view, I think we'll very, very quickly see this coming around again. So I put this one here and a note of hope. I also put in a note about the national funding formula. So the guidelines for what year are we in? That we just into 2023 to 4. So this is last year's funding guidelines. The national EAL funding guidelines were for primary £565 and just over £1,500 for secondary. So that was the recommendation for how much per pupil per year for the first 3 years should be allocated to each EAL pupil. Now, the problem with this is that it's not ring fenced. So this goes into the general money that schools receive and it gets lost. But I want to say as well, it has and will again be a priority. There is money in the system for EAL. Now, in a funding crisis, that is really, really hard to see, but it is there. So one question that I've been asked quite a few times is, well, you know, my local authority says there's no money for it. I just wanted to show this. So the DFE groups how much money local authorities actually allocate to EAL pupils in these bands. So for primary, it was a guideline of £565 last year. And for the past 2 years, almost all schools, I mean, I think there's what, 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that, local authorities in the country have not, 140 plus have fallen into that band. And actually almost below. For secondary, the picture is really similar. So the amount recommended for secondary is higher. And again, the vast majority were in this band or slightly below or above it. And actually, we've seen that they've come towards that funding band. So there's definitely that money in the system. And I think it's really, really important that we know it's there. Okay. So having put a bit of context into place, that EAL is a, you know, not just a good and important thing, but something that has infrastructure. It is part of our national education system. The policies have been developed, although they're slightly in abeyance now, it's all still there. The money is in the system. I know it's hard to access, but under the surface, EAL is still there. It's just on the surface that I think we have a lot of the problems. But those are real problems because if people can't see it, they can't do it. And I was at the Birmingham Education Partnership conference a couple of weeks ago. Hello to anyone who was there. And I was standing making small talk next to a head teacher. And he said, I said, oh, what session are you going to this morning? And he said, oh, I'm going to this one on disadvantaged boys. And I said, oh, cool, that's interesting. Why is that? And he said, oh, well, we work in a really disadvantaged area, and so it's obviously core to what we do. I said, what are you doing? So I'm here for the EAL workshop. I said, oh, yeah, we're 78% EAL in our school, he said. And nothing. That contrast, we work in a very disadvantaged area, therefore disadvantage is important to us. We work in a very multilingual area, therefore nothing. And it's that lack of attention at policy level, I think. There's no guidance from the DFE whatsoever. There's barely anything in initial teacher education. There's 18 words, I counted them, 18 words in the teacher standards for 1.6 million children. There is nothing of note in the Ofsted inspection handbooks or in the education inspection framework. So we've got these gaps, and because of that loss of attention, people don't really know beyond the group of poor, wonderful people we have here what it means. So Forgive me if you've seen them, I use them a lot. And this is our overlap from the previous session. This is what attainment in EAL looks like. So if you can see my mouse, this is the proficiency in English categories along the bottom, and you've got English and Welsh monolingual here. This is mean teacher assessed level in English. So we can see that pupils with stage A, new to English, do very badly, and I'm amazed they get any marks at all, to be honest, if you're brand new to English. But at stage B, they do better. At stage C, you can see they're within fighting distance of the average, and at stages D and E, they're above it. We see the same age 7 reading proficiency in English. So now our national average is the dotted line and the monolingual is on the right-hand side. Again, new to English within the margin of error of nothing. But when we get to stage C, developing competence, that's where we can see they're within spitting distance, within the margin of error of the national average. Stage D, competent, they are beyond the margin of error, better than the average. And interestingly, at stage E, fluent, they are beyond the margin of error above monolingual pupils. This is Fisa Demi's work. This is from 2018 in Lambeth, but they have exceptionally good data. Now, this is old money. So this is A-star GCSEs, A-star to C GCSEs. And what we see here again is the same picture. So first thing we need to take away is this message: bilingual children can achieve highly with the right support. And actually, they tend to outperform monolingual children once they reach a high level of English proficiency. That's hugely significant because that gives us a rationale for developing both languages and also having very, very high expectations of children. Now, I can see one person has put on the Padlet that they want to ask, what is the best intervention I have in place? I've grouped children according to the Bell Foundation listening and speaking scales, got weekly slots for TAs to carry out interventions, but it's a big group. What's the best thing to do? Fantastic question. I hope you don't mind me doing a bit of background as I build up to it. Please keep them coming. Okay. So here we have a lovely data table. Now, if you are like me and love a good table of data, this will be heaven. For the rest of you, I promise it'll be over soon. What we see here is a study by Steve Strand and his colleagues, looking at consortia of local authorities where there's reasonably good data and trying to work out how long it takes children to achieve proficiency in English. And we can see that actually to go from stage A to stage B, so new to English to that very early acquisition, takes just under 2 years, just under 4 years to go up to stage C, 6 years to get to D, and nearly 7, 6 3/4, 2/3 years to get up to stage E. Now, if we go to a starting point of stage B, we can see it's 3 and a bit years to get up to C. So it's less than it was from stage A, but it's not exactly like you've done this and it's just a remainder. It's still the largest part of this. Getting up to stage C is hard. And we see actually from stage C to D, it's not majorly different. So you'd imagine that to get from B to C would just be between 1.8 and 3.9. So I call it, I don't know, 2.2 years, but it's not, it's 3 and a bit. So you can see here that something happens, that the acquisition is really quick at the beginning, but then slows. And one of the key areas where it slows is just before we move up to D. So it's stage C, and then again at stage E. What does that tell us? First of all, it means that bilingual learners need support all the way through. We'll see quick progress at the beginning, but then it really slows down. But there's a reason for that. And the reason that that progress slows right down is because at stage C, they hit that intermediate or upper intermediate plateau. Their language knowledge is deepening and broadening. And I like to give this example of my daughter. She's 5. So we love this game, right? This game where you say the yes-no game. You're not allowed to say yes, you're not allowed to say no. And at the beginning, she'd say, I said, do you want an ice cream? She goes, I would. I said, oh, right. Is it time to go to the park? I would. Do you think you're going to win this game? I would. She's got the same phrase. Over time, now she's 5, she's got a range. Okay, would you like an ice cream? I would. That would be really nice. Thank you. Would you like to go to the park? Yeah, that'd be Well, not I say yes. That'd be really fun. Let's do that. And you can see how that language is broadening. And that's where the negotiation comes in. She can now argue with me like nothing else because she's got a whole range of phrases at her disposal that she can use. That's what's happening similarly with your bilingual learners. Whereas before they could maybe answer a question one way, they're developing other ways to articulate that, to answer questions, other ways to do things, other language they can use. So what happens is you stop seeing that increase, but it's broadening and deepening. That level C is really, really important. And we also know from that attainment data, if we look back a little bit, from that attainment data, this is me trying to do too many screens at once. It's here at stage C where they really start to be able to access the curriculum. It's here at stage C that the progress particularly slows down. So we can see that curriculum learning and language learning are really going ahead here. So we know that there'll be rapid progress in the beginning, but pupils will need that support all the way through to the end. And also, I guess how you do that is going to be really dependent on your school. Okay. So now we get to this bit. How do we move from arrival to thrival? Let's think about what we want teachers to be doing. Now, by teachers, I mean everyone except yourself and your EAL team if you have one in the school. So I'm making a distinction here between the EAL team and class teachers or subject teachers or any others. Now, many of you will hold both of those roles, but I mean the colleagues who are in the classroom but don't have a language specialism. How can we get them doing some of that work? And I've tried to organize it into a series of rough but useful principles. When I say rough, I suppose I really mean flexible, broadly applicable. So here's some of those principles that we can share with people. Language and concepts are organized in disciplines. In secondary school, we call these subjects. We could think of topics in primary school as really interdisciplinary units of learning. In universities, we're absolutely fine talking about that. We have the language of each discipline. I'm an applied linguist by training. We have our own way of talking. I'm a qualitative researcher. I do some quantitative work. They bring their own ways of thinking and so on. In schools, we think more of subject vocabulary, but less in terms of subject discourse and less in terms of subject concept. So the upshot of this is that children in the curriculum, their language and their subject knowledge have to develop together. One of the reasons to avoid withdrawal is because you're focusing on language, but it's really hard then to do subject support. And that means that they can't ever really get far ahead in either. It's only when subject and subject language are integrated they can do well. That's a major argument for mainstreaming, in my view. But it also means that the way to address it is to support language. So where colleagues have children who are struggling in the classroom, it's probably because they're struggling with the language. The other two, next two principles are things that anyone can do. So if you're not sure what to do, prioritize vocabulary and give children an opportunity for talk. One of the reasons for this is that people often think that to get good writing, especially in secondary, especially in Key Stage 4, you've just got to practice writing. But what we end up is that children are kind of trapped repeating the same errors they've always made. If you give them an opportunity to talk before they write, you'll find you get much, much better writing because it allows them to organize their ideas, as oracy does, but for bilingual children also to organize their language. That's really, really crucial. And finally, this idea that language is a hugely collaborative thing. Pupils are only going to develop their language and their subject knowledge in interaction with others. Okay, so we've got 5 principles, and I'll share where I've written about those at more length in a moment. 5 principles now we can share with others. So what I've tried to show so far is that children will achieve very, very highly. We have the evidence to support that ambition for them. That something special happens around about that intermediate level. So for primary teachers, if you can get children up to stage C, by the time they leave primary, they're going to be in a good position to access the secondary curriculum. Many will go further, but for most children, getting from stage A to C by the end of primary is a solid expectation. So we can get them up to a point where they can really access the curriculum, and then we can move into what could happen in that curriculum. Now, we have a set of principles that we can use across the school, and I'm going to spend a moment just breaking it down into some even smaller chunks. So what can we say to colleagues who want to know how to support bilingual learners? Well, really, really simply, you've got to do 3 things. SLA here, second language acquisition, that's our academic term for language learning. What children, EAL pupils, need to do is be exposed to huge amounts of rich language. They need to interact with others, and that interaction needs to be meaningful. So that means, for example, we're not talking about grammar worksheets, we're not talking about copying or filling tasks. Meaningful usually means where one person knows something the other person doesn't. So it's an information exchange, really. You're working together on a task. So if you look at any classroom, for example, and you see that the newly arrived child is sitting with a teaching assistant or another adult in the classroom, that's great. They're going to be exposed to quite a lot of rich language, but how much opportunity will they have for interaction with their peers? So very often, that in-class support means they get the exposure, but there's minimal interaction with anyone except that adult. And it's only the real language that you get through interaction with your peers and with the teacher, which is really going to boost language acquisition. So all the time we're looking at, are children exposed to masses of language, and do they have the opportunity to interact on actual meaningful activities? We can go further than that basic recipe. So one of the things that is really important for acquisition is the ability to notice what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. When children and adults actually can notice the gap between what they want to say and what they're able to say, and then they're supplied with the language they need, the brain acquires it really quickly. When you're given a list of language items, phrases, vocabulary, and so on, and then asked to use them, you acquire it less quickly. So one thing that really, really works is to give basic pre-teaching of key vocabulary. Make sure the concepts are straight. So if you're teaching volcanoes, you need the terminology for volcanoes. You need to understand what a volcano is, that it's part of our kind of broader subject of plate tectonics. Anyone who's a volcano expert, please correct me after the event. That the lava is coming up from the, shall I say, mantle? Yeah. That it's, the broader concepts. I mean, everyone will probably guess what a volcano is, but you've got to know a little bit more to succeed in that lesson. So you need a bit of concept, bit of content, bit of subject knowledge, and you need some key vocabulary. Then we want to get children into an activity where they're using it. That could be filling in a worksheet. It could be watching a video, making notes, comparing with your partner. And that's the point where handing out a new vocabulary worksheet, for example, is going to be really useful. If you ask them to tell their partner about it, and that's the moment where they struggle and they have the vocabulary to refer to, it's going to go in really quickly. Even better, if you add that oracy, that bilingual oracy stage first. Make your notes. Right, now you're going to explain it to your partner. Make notes in whatever language you want, prepare what you're going to say, have a practice with the person next to you. Okay, now you're going to do it. Then we see that language is being fed in at the point of need when they're noticing the gap. That's hugely productive. That's especially important for new arrivals because they're the ones who are going to be able to really, really use that really effectively. The other thing is, say, meaning before form. It's almost entirely useless trying to teach children grammar when they don't need it. So when you're trying to say something and you can't, that's when the teacher needs to feed in with some of that good grammar. And explicit teaching of language is really important. Explicit teaching of grammar is really valuable, but not in the abstract. It's only when it is actually needed and actually used. That's when it makes a big difference. And finally, just to say, you don't need to be the one talking to them all the time. They don't need to be talking to an adult the whole time. A lot of language is about what you produce, and actually who you talk to is in many ways less important. Having someone to talk to, having someone that you can produce that language for is what's really important. So then we come on to another principle that people can use. Is it about the quantity of interaction, or is it about the quality of interaction? Is it better to have less high quality talk or more quantity of talk? Well, there's been a lot of research on this. We often talk about two concepts in language acquisition research. We talk about age on arrival, because age has a big impact on your learning of a language. Not as big as people think, but still pretty big. And length of residence. So how old were you when you arrived, and how long have you been learning English? There was a really interesting study. It was actually a PhD by someone called Andrea Hellman, who was looking at schools, and she noted that it wasn't when you first started using the language, it was when you first started having significant use. And she defined that as the daily interaction you get in school. So again, very consistent with our principles. So we know that if we start the clock when children arrive in school, even if they've had access to the language in some way before, and that involves lots and lots of classroom language, yes, but also social interaction. Here's a massive starting point. Set up a buddying scheme. If they've got buddies, if new arrived pupils have buddies, if someone points them towards where the kids are playing football or whatever it is they want, that's where they'll get a lot of that social interaction. And it's not just classroom language, especially in the early stages. They get massive exposure, it's meaningful, they get to interact around it. So play is huge for early language acquisition. It's not all about your teaching. In fact, I go so far as to say, when children make that really quick progress in the first year and sound pretty fluent almost immediately, it's often despite what happens in the classroom. The value of that play and that peer interaction is so great that it massively outweighs anything else. And the final thing we know is that lots of support for first languages should be included. Anytime we can value and support and encourage pupils to write and speak in their first languages, it's going to be really effective, because it's those first, it's that underlying language capacity that makes a huge difference. Okay, I'm going to pause here because it's enough of me talking for one time, and I'm going to switch to these questions. So my question to you, and I can see some coming in the Padlet as well, is what should you expect from your colleagues? What should you expect from your specialist colleagues, so EAL people like yourself? What should you expect from non-specialists, and what about from everyone else? That can involve school leaders, parents, anyone else, and so on. So what's your job, what's their job? And while you respond to that, either in the Padlet or in the chat, I will turn some of the questions we have here. Before I do, I'm going to have a sip of water, if that's okay. We've got some really great questions in here. And I can see some people are responding to each other, which is even better. So what's my opinion on giving students a translator, especially when they've been in the country for 3 years and still speak limited English? Anonymous, do you mean a translator app or an actual person to come in to translate? I'm a big fan of using technology where we can. Let's think about what our longer term goal is. So a lot of what we want to do with an app, we can probably prep in advance. So if we think about how we adapt materials and just make them perhaps accessible bilingually, ChatGPT is pretty good for instant translations of quite long passages. It's often better than Google Translate and others. It also allows you to ask reasonably good questions. Chat PDF is another app. That's ChatGPT. PDF is great, really brilliant for university level, and I guess for secondary. You can upload a PDF and ask it questions. So you can bang it in and say, what does Sharples 2023 say about the role of specific language impairment in EAL? And if it's in there, it will answer you. It's pretty good, actually. Not perfect, sure, but pretty good. Yeah, DeepL is great as well. So actually, it's easier and easier to prep materials at very, very low cost of time and no cost of cash to make them more accessible. That means that the need for a translator in the class, which does slow things down and puts that barrier in between the person who they want to speak to, goes. It can also, I think, be structured slightly by encouraging children to work bilingually, giving them that extra time in the lesson to organize their thoughts. That can all really help. I'm just going to switch my slide. If we're going to use translation apps, I would recommend Microsoft Translate. So if you're a Microsoft rather than a Google School, I'm not sure it will break the language barrier, but this is what it looks like. So you set it up, and then if I were joining the chats, if I were a pupil, I would enter the 5-letter code my teacher has set up and my name and my language, which is English. And then this is what it looks like. So I can type in here, or I can just speak into it, which is absolutely game-changing for pupils whose literacy in English or in any language isn't yet that strong. That means that I can speak into it and it will transcribe what I say and it will appear on other people's screen in their language. So it's acting like an interpreter between us. And that's brilliant because that doesn't slow down. What you have to do otherwise is one person translates, takes a while, it comes across to you, you answer really quickly, then you have to wait again. But this means a whole group of people can be working in different languages at the same time. It's not the answer to everything, but I think it is, it's a definite step forward. I was running a project for Year 7 and Year 8 pupils recently at a school in London, and they were all pretty proficient in English, certainly proficient enough for us to moderate our language so that everyone could continue together. But we had one pupil who was brand new to English, and it allowed them to participate. So while I was doing a bit of my talking section, I just had a laptop on the desk, hit record, and it transcribed and translated everything I said for the pupil. Not brilliantly, but good enough. And then when I finished talking, I just tapped it off because otherwise it would pick up background chat from people and get a bit confused. But it was really helpful. I would love to know, what do other people think about using translation apps? I would say they're generally helpful where you can. People might have used Google Buttons, for example. They're quite popular as well. Oh, pizza. I don't know, I'm afraid. One for the community, if anyone has it. Helen, I wonder if you might check on DeepL if you've got it up and running. I can see that Amanda said, will we share the slides? Yeah, of course we will. We've got a question here, and I'd love to see what other people say as well. How can I support Key Stage 1 EL children when they can't access the materials in their first language? What do you mean they can't access the materials in their first language? Could you tell us a bit more about what materials there are and why they can't access it? And then maybe we could definitely look at that one together. So what are the advice on supporting EL pupils who are also SEND, for example, pupil who has DLD, developmental language disorder, I assume, alongside being EAL? A really specialist one. So for those cases, I work with Senkos who are good with EAL, and between us we can work it out. We don't have There's just not much out there for this question. It's really, really hard. So what I'd say is there is absolutely nothing about being SEN, even with a specific language impairments or DLD, that means that children can't achieve bilingual proficiency. So roughly speaking, you're in between two things, and it's really tricky because the quality guidance just isn't out there yet. You take the same assumptions that in the context of what you'd expect with your SEND hat on, pupils will still achieve highly if they're bilingual. So there's nothing about language impairment that I've ever seen that says bilingual pupils, sorry, that SEND pupils should be held back from learning language in some way, or it should be a particular problem. So for those pupils, I would keep my EAL principles in mind, that I'd probably be guided by the Senko, because that would most likely be the one that would guide teaching practice the most. But again, if you'd like to say more there, I'd be happy to. Come back to this one on Key Stage 1 EAL. So they're not literate in their own language. So lower ability, completely new to education. Right, so we've got two things here. So lower ability is really tricky. If a pupil's new to education and other pupils aren't, and they're really low proficiency in English, it would be difficult to assess their ability. So for those pupils, I totally trust your judgment, but I would tend to say we can't really yet assess their proficiency until we get other things up to speed. They can maybe not access written material in their own language because they're not as literate as their English first language peers, but they're certainly, I assume they have spoken proficiency in their language. So that might say that one of the things we need to do is switch to a primarily verbal mode for a while and focus on developing that literacy. At Key Stage 1, those pupils will catch up. They will catch up if we stick to the key principles. Lots and lots of rich language exposure, lots of opportunities to use it, really engaging them with the life of the classroom. That's the same strategy to use. And don't forget, they're in Key Stage 1. They've got more, a decade until they get to the end of compulsory education. So there's definitely time for them to catch up and to go further. And that evidence that those bilingual pupils will on average do very, very well, that includes pupils who arrive in Key Stage 1, completely new to English, completely struggling. So my advice on that one, and again, without knowing a huge amount of details, but I'd say you stick to your principles, you focus on spoken language, make sure they're well included in the classroom. You're really building up oracy, and you're recognizing that their literacy is still developing, and it's starting from an earlier point that year than their peers are. But there's only a bit of time in it. You might find that bilingual buddies can help. You might find that translators will help. But just if you think this pupil is completely new to English, treat them as any other new to English pupil. Direct the language towards them, recognize they might be silent for a period, try and pair them with high achieving partners, and just know that although it will seem overwhelmingly impossible at the beginning, the magic will happen. The brain is a phenomenal pattern spotting machine. And I had an email today from someone. We had this long running chat today and on Friday about supporting Key Stage 4 arrivals. And someone just wrote, I won't say any more about it because they wrote it privately, but off the back of this chat, one of the participants wrote to me and said, listen, I just want to share my story, that I'm an EAL teacher and I came to this country and my son was in exactly this situation and he's just got his PhD. And I know that's not a typical case for everybody, but it looked really tough and it happened. So for Key Stage 1 pupils who can't access written materials in their own language, stick to a verbal mode, build that language capacity, lots of buddying, lots of directed language, lots of opportunities to use the language, and just remember that under the hood, that that pattern spotting machine that is the brain is really firing. We also have people coming at Key Stage 4, and that's some really, sorry, Key Stage 3, that's some good advice there. I'm going to pause on these a second and just switch, because we talked about, Helen, that's fab, and Natalia, thank you. We've got TTM translators coming in on the chat. That's great. Okay, I'm just going to switch back to another slide now, because we talked about this idea from arrival to thrival. I have this diagram I like to use to think about how an EAL coordinator might develop over the course of a career. And it looks something like this. So that idea that we're starting by getting to know the school, building up that policy folder, and thinking about how your aspirations, then you're choosing your assessments, and then we're welcoming students. And this is the point. You notice that it's only when the systems are set up and we understand how the school works that we can really effectively welcome students. And I want to think for a minute about what that trajectory would look like for bilingual pupils. So the priorities that I would suggest are number one, a buddying scheme. I think it's I mean, absolutely hugely important. Here, if you don't have one, is a terrific one. The Hampshire MTAS, so the Hampshire Local Authority Teams, Young Interpreter Scheme, they provide peer support for pupils who are learning EAL. That means that monolingual children can learn to interpret the school for bilingual children, not just the other way around. So it doesn't rely on having same language pairs. So first thing from arrival to thrival, there's lots to do to make sure we understand how the school works, make sure that we have the resources in place, make sure that we're assessing children effectively. But I think first thing I would do before I thought about any EAL provision is I would set up a buddying scheme. So if you have one, brill. If you don't, the Hampshire one is like 70 quid a year. And I think that's, you know, a bargain for what they offer you. I have obviously no stake in it. I just think it's really good. And the reason for that is you're maximizing exposure, you're maximizing meaningful use of the language, and that's going to make a real difference. And for those pupils we're looking at who are new to Key Stage 1, new to Key Stage 2, new to Key Stage 3 or 4, that's something you can do that's going to have a huge impact on the language they can develop in the classroom. I'd also make sure that you've got access to good quality resources. So the Bell Foundation is brilliant. They do a very robust assessment, although people have said it can be quite weighty. It often gives more data than people need, and we'll talk about that. But their resources are great. I would also say keep your eyes open for people who can give you really specialist input. So Better Bilingual, if you are in the Bristol and West region, although they do work nationally a little. Better Bilingual are an absolute fab consultancy. Catherine Brennan has been the EAL teacher for a long time and set up by herself, I think, so she could just share this work full time. The EAL Academy, Graham Smith's outfit in London, are really good. They do some online courses as well. And Hounslow Language Service, also in London, Rahana Ahmed and her team. These are really experienced EAL coordinators. I'd also, of course, recommend that people join NALVIC, the Subject Association for EAL. I think they are fab resources to get people up and get people going.